I want to send a special thank you to ClayShare for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Through their online ceramic education platform, they offer hundreds of full-length classes, as well as thousands of instructional videos that can be streamed straight to your smart TV or compatible device. They offer a wide range of topics that are perfect for the beginner to the experienced potter. With your membership, you'll receive weekly live tutorial broadcasts, access to virtual workshops with well-known artists, and special discounts on ceramic supplies. If you sign up today, use the offer code RAMBLER25 to receive a 25% discount on your first 3 months. For more information, check out clayshare.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 363 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Brett Kern about his ceramic sculpture. He draws from pop culture of the 80s and 90s to make dinosaurs and images of Rocky, E.T., and other icons that you'll recognize from movies and TV. If you'd like to see examples of his work, you can do that at his website, or you can follow him on Instagram under Brett Kern Art. Before we get to that episode, I wanted to do today's Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Southern Crossings Pottery Festival. They've moved their festival online this year, and it's going to be happening this weekend, March the 5th through the 7th. In addition to the sale, they're also hosting a raffle for Blessings in a Backpack, which is a nonprofit working to feed children in the greater Louisville area. To join any of these events, you can visit sxpf.org. Also wanted to take a minute and thank the folks that have been donating to the podcast. We are listener supported, and I couldn't make the show without the help of folks like Molly McCarthy and Rebecca Glambaki, who recently made donations. If you'd like to get involved yourself and join the Red Clay Rambler community, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Let's talk about your childhood and how you would think about toys. Like, because you reference that a lot in your work. Did you personify your toys? Like, give them names, talk to them, all of that kind of thing?
Let's see. I don't think that I don't know that I had any toys that didn't already have names. You know, like when I'm playing with Raphael, it was Raphael. I'm pretty sure I talked to him and he was my friend, but I didn't give him any new names or anything. I definitely used to, I would, you know, if we didn't have money for some of the new toys or things like that, I would make parts for them. You know, I would like find garbage and like make them new suits and things like that. So I had a close relationship with all my toys. You know, I had an older brother and a younger sister. So and two parents that worked. So there was not a lot of attention to go around, you know, so I kind of escaped into my own world a little bit.
There's something about that birth order too. I'm not up on my like psychology, but there's something about like firstborn is the overachiever. The youngest one is the baby, but what is the middle child? What are you guys known for?
The renegade.
Gotcha.
I think. I don't know. That's why I always identified with Raphael as a Ninja Turtle. You know, he my brother was the overachiever, Leonardo, and I didn't want to listen to him. I wanted to do my own thing, so there's a little bit of anger in there, a little bit of just wanting to be yourself. But yeah, my younger sister was definitely the baby and the princess. So that fits right in. I cookie cutter, middle child right there.
So we're going to date ourselves because we're talking about these pop culture references that younger listeners are going to be like, what are they even talking about? But I was an 80s and 90s kid, and you were as well. So when you think about like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles like that, it's hard to describe to people now. Well, they're still popular, but how popular they were when we were younger.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like when you first latched on to sort of the myth or the story of that cartoon?
So I was born in 1985. So I am on I think I was a little young when Ninja Turtles started, but right when those movies started coming out, I was all aboard and all in. I definitely my first exposure would have been like the cartoons that came out. I remember the first toy I got was on Christmas, and it was a Raphael. And it had the plastic sheet where you had to pull out all the weapons, those brown weapons from it. Yeah. And I can remember getting it and playing with it. So that's my earliest memory of Ninja Turtles, is getting Raphael. And I think that was my introduction to it too. I was too late on the comics. I was too young for that. And then, so when that cartoon was popular, I think that's when I was getting into it.
It's funny how you talk about like you pulled out the weapons out of that injection molded plastic, I think is what those things were. And I forgot that 80s toys often came in a way that you could tell how they were made. And I think all of us kind of soak that stuff in. And now I see, when I think about your work, like the slip casting process, making things in parts, do you think that was an influence, like figuring out pretty early on that you could make things for the toys, but also you could figure out how they were made?
I think that's a huge part of it. Another thing that I talk about all the time in my lectures and things like that, but the behind the scenes books that came with movies, I would eat those up, and I'm watching them make molds of these clay creations they made and then cast them out of foam rubber and build the structures. And I love that stuff, and I'm sure we'll eventually talk about Jurassic Park, but watching them like sculpt those dinosaurs and make molds of them, I was obsessed with that. And that's sort of like what happens with my work and like rediscovering my work over the last decade. And what I wanted to make was figuring out those things that made an impression on me when I was younger, that I soaked up, but I didn't really know how to use it until recently.
And I think there's something about being a far enough distance away from your childhood where you can see it and see those objects and ideas as both something you experience but separate from yourself. Because I know, like, if you tried to make this art as a 16-year-old, that would have been a little bit trickier because you're only 10 years away from being a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point did you start thinking like, oh no, this is it. This is what I'm going to make work about?
It would have been about my last year in grad school, overlapping with my year in Red Lodge, Montana, when I was a resident there right after grad school. There was, some self-discovery that needed to happen. I was really into toys. I was really into these shows, but I'm sure you can probably attest to this too. Like, it wasn't popular to be a nerd until relatively recently. Now everyone accepts all that stuff, but I remember like being in high school, being on the football team, and like having just bought a Jurassic Park 3 toy and like being deathly afraid of anyone finding out about that. So it was something that I was still always into, but had to kind of push it down and repress it a little bit. And then, once I got into clay and art and started becoming a little bit more sure about myself and getting a little bit more self-confidence, then I really that stuff started to come out. And that would have been, in grad school. I went into grad school making, traditional wheel thrown pottery, and they challenged me, and I started taking mold making classes, and that's really where things started to change.
Yeah, you went to West Virginia, right?
Yep.
It's one of the rare schools that when you leave there, you know how to make things. Like it is a skill. They're not going to let you out the door without having refined skills in multiple areas. And even production style making is something that's embraced there. So can you talk about what you learned from that environment and how that affects your work?
Well, there is, the production program there was very technically oriented, and my education there was slightly different than what someone would receive there now, just because the teacher that had been there for 33 years retired after my first year, and then Shoji, Jen, and Boomer came in my second year and third year. So I got sort of both of the worlds there. But the production program there, like you learn how to use the jigger jollies, and it's a lot of trimming, throwing, and they challenge you too. I had to make some canisters, and you're just sitting there throwing every day nonstop. And so that was, I learned a lot doing that, and getting better at throwing. But then that was my first mold making experience, was grad school, my second year with Boomer. And I don't know if you've ever seen him demo or have done
I
a
haven't.
workshop. He is very particular about his molds. And so, I mean, I learned right from the start, how to be careful and how to make a well-crafted, technically precise mold from there.
What's the original connection with WVU and that type of skill? Like, was that just one of the older? I can't remember the professor. Bob, what was his name?
Bob Anderson, yeah.
Yeah, was that his thing? Like, why is it so rich in skill at that university?
Well, I think it has to do with him, and he was a traditional potter and really stressed that. And he started the production program there in, I want to say, the early 2000s, probably 2000, 2001 era. And I think that that became so popular in their region and what that school really became known for, that when Boomer and Shoji came in, like they were hired for their ideas on because they believed in it. So they wanted to stress that craftsmanship while, making a little bit more conceptual pieces that are still well crafted. So I would credit Bob with really getting that going in the area.
And one of the things that WVU is known for is also their connection to China and to Jingdezhen, a longstanding connection that continues to this day with people going over to study. So what was your experience with that?
I was as green as you could be when I got into grad school. I was good at throwing and good at trimming. I didn't really have quite an eye for design yet, or quite, I didn't have any taste. I didn't know what I wanted to make. But, and going to China was my first time ever on a plane, so I was naive. I didn't really know what was going on, but I just got on the plane, flew 24 hours to China and stayed there for 3 months. And it was humbling. I feel like it's good in grad school to just in the beginning learn that you are nothing and insignificant. And then you can build yourself back up from there. So going over there, when you using their porcelain, it's incredibly difficult. It's finicky. So right from the start, you go over there, you don't know how to throw anymore because you can't. You're trying to use this stuff and it just keeps falling down on you. I remember my first experience. I pulled up the clay, went up about 3 inches. Okay, I'm getting the hang of this. My next pull shrunk down 2 inches. Like, okay, well, this is going to be trickier than I thought. So that I think really got me going in grad school. But then there's a lot of stuff that I still sort of absorbed and think about. And one in particular is just how separated everything is. Like there is a thrower, there is a mold maker, there is a trimmer, and like if you need glaze, you just go down to the glaze store and you pick out what you want. And I think in grad school, when I was in that really traditional system in the beginning and coming from that, I sort of thought that I had to make all my own clay. I had to create my own glazes and I had to do it all myself. And going to China and seeing, I mean, the people that started it all, they just go to the glaze store and buy it. I'm like, well, heck, I'm going to buy my glaze. Why am I wasting my time making these crappy glazes that don't work? So
I feel like the guild system, like if we talk about historical ceramics, was really great because people got trained in a variety of aspects. That led into what I think of as like the studio potter movement, where everyone does everything. But then there was also this like offshoot, like some people went into studio pottery, other factories were using the very same techniques and really going industrial. But now you as a maker, you're kind of in between the two. Like you use industrial methods at times, and then you also are a studio maker who does a lot of things. Like you make the pot, or you make the sculptures, you glaze, you do all of those things. So can you talk about how you found your process, quote unquote, within or between industry and studio?
well, I really like working with my hands. And I really like, like you get to the end of the day and your back hurts and you're just tired. I don't know. It's something about that drew me into ceramics, and that's what I liked about it. Cause I started college as a graphic designer just because I liked art, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was too still of a lifestyle for me.
Not enough
So
suffering.
not, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some deep psychological issue that I need to suffer in order to feel like I've accomplished anything, but that's the truth. And so I don't know, it felt good to get dirty and be exhausted and work with my hands, so that's really what drew me into that craft aspect of it. But then when it comes down to it, what I collected and what I was drawn to, I'm drawn to these mass-produced plastic items. I buy the toys, I buy, that sort of thing. So I would like to think that my work is a combination of that sort of stuff. It is a handmade clay art object with sort of a mass-produced bent to it.
So one of the things that the first work I saw of yours was inflatable, things that look like inflatables. And since then I've gotten to know like a lot of different sort of facets of you as a sculptor. But how did you pick that first sort of aesthetic choice to make something that not only looks like an inflatable, but that you can it references how it's made? Like with inflatables, we see seams, we see connections. So how did you pick that aesthetic from all the different toys you were looking at from your childhood?
I'm really drawn to textures. I feel like that's the greatest thing of the magic of slip casting. When you first get into it, you make a mold of something and that first cast you pull out, it looks like exactly what you thought it would look like, but now it's clay leather, and it just blows your mind. So after getting into slip casting and doing that sort of thing, I was really drawn to just visual textures and would walk around stores and just like examine things like a maniac, I think. um and I would sort of make mental notes. If something was cool, I would buy it, like a ridged plunger or something like that, and make a mold of that and see what I could use it for. But I remember seeing inflatables and just thinking like, I'm going to store that away for something. I love the wrinkles at the seams. I really think glaze is going to do some fun stuff with that. So I'll put that in the back of my brain, because I didn't know at the time what to use it for. And when I moved to West Virginia, I had met someone that was also into dinosaurs, and that had been an aspect of my personality that I wanted to but hadn't been able to bring into my work. And we were sitting around talking and decided we wanted to do a dinosaur show. And I remember thinking, like, in that moment, that's what I was saving the inflatable for, was that. Because I have a lot of memories, from when I was younger, of having inflatable dinosaurs. They were huge in the 80s. When my sister was born, I got one as a present, as a reward for being good in the hospital. So would have been 3 years old, and I can remember it and picture the texture and the color of it. And I have pictures of me with inflatable dinosaurs when I was a kid. So sort of the combination of all that stuff just clicked at once, and I started making them. I thought that I was going to make 20 for a show, and then I'll have to figure out the next thing to make for the next show. I did not realize it was going to be my thing.
Well, it's your thing because people wanted them, right? I mean, it was a supply and demand issue.
That's exactly it. A piece got into a show and it sold, and they asked for 2 more. So I'd send them 2 more, and it just ballooned from there.
So when you're using an actual inflatable as the mother object that you make the mold from, how with inflatables, if you blow them up really big, they're very tight, but they don't look soft. Then if you let a little of the air out, they have this interesting quality of looking both like they're pushing out and they're sucking in, but that doesn't necessarily jive with making something as in plaster. So how do you know like how inflated is going to make the dinosaur look real versus make it look like it's fake or that it's not the original reference of an inflatable?
That's the whole thing. That's I've spent years figuring that out. I do, again, suffering. I need to suffer in order to feel like I've achieved something. But I started from found objects. The ones I make now, I'll talk about later. I designed them myself, but I started with found inflatable objects. And I was like, oh, the process is sort of fossilizing them. I pour material on top of them and then turn them into stone, permanent stone, basically. So I started with these huge ones that are over 2 feet wide, and each part of the mold is 60 pounds of plaster. That it was a disaster the first couple tries. So those were pretty tough, but I was learning, because with one of them I actually cut open and tried to fill with plaster to give it some rigidity. But like you said, that pressure pushed out a lot of those seams, and it looked like just a smooth object, which I want those wrinkles. I'm crazy about the wrinkles. And so what I found was there's no substitute for air. It has to be air in there. And I blow it up where I can kind of get it to a look where I'm happy with the amount of wrinkles that are in it. And then as I'm building the clay up around the inflatable so I can make a mold of it, one of the keys is to really make sure that there's no empty space underneath the inflatable. You really have to support it and just pack that clay in there, because otherwise when you pour the plaster onto it, it sinks into those crevices. So you really support it. And then once it's in the clay, I can even like bend it a little bit. I can push the clay in one area to get like a extra neck wrinkle. So I'll usually do that with them. And then even like the legs, I'll cut the legs off and then I'll glue a plug onto a leg so I can blow up the legs by themselves too, just to make sure that every part has the right look to it.
Yeah, okay. I wondered about that. Because after you've made your molds, you're casting parts, putting them together, and then because of that plug, you can cast a leg separate and all of that. Then do you glaze them together? Is that what is actually holding it together, or are you scoring and all of that?
I'm connecting them with slip, when they're all leather hard. So I'll cast them all, and as soon as I can handle them, then I'll just dip them in slip and stick them on the side and clean up the seam. I have to cut them apart because when you cast with a mold, you do get those seams. and I want those seams to be there. So I'll separate all of the parts right on that seam, and then I don't have to clean it up or anything. I'll just connect them. That some people have asked why I don't cast them in one mold, and it's basically just so I don't have seams going all over the place.
And you mentioned that you started off with the idea like, I'll make 20 different ones and then that'll be the end of this idea. How many different styles do you actually make of that inflatable dinosaur?
I do think that I don't have the number in my head right now, but I want to say it's 15-ish, with some of them having been retired and deceased. So I've done a run of them, and once that run is over, I'll break the molds and throw them away. So there's about 15. But what happened was, so I made those big ones that I was telling you about, the 2 feet long ones. And I was an adjunct professor. I was breathtakingly poor at the time. And I remember I got into a show and I took it to the UPS to ship it, and it cost $120 to pack it and ship it. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I need something smaller if I'm going to do this. So that's when I had to figure out how to make small inflatables. And, I found one that went with that. But I really wanted to make my own designs, because I wanted to be unlimited with my options and be able to do whatever I wanted to. So the first couple I sculpted to look inflatable. I was never truly happy with those, and I experimented, but I figured out a way basically now to design them, and then I'll cut out the vinyl and glue 2 pieces of vinyl together, and then I'll just glue a plug on there and inflate them, and then I just make a mold of that. So I draw it out. I think about how it would have to be once it's flat, because it expands when it's flat, and then I'll do a few tests and glue it together and make my own now.
What's the glue that will hold vinyl and not burn it or melt it?
It melts it, but it's that Loctite vinyl adhesive. So I have the lead of a mechanical pencil, and I'll sit there and I'll just draw a little bead around it, compress it, and kind of squeeze out the excess. And then I'll move on to the next little bit. It usually takes about a week, because I'll glue it, I'll blow it up, and then dunk it under water to see where the holes are. And I'll fill in where those holes are. And then, and another day, another little hole opens up somewhere. And so it's a week-long process of just finding holes and re-gluing the seams and areas. And then once I get it, it's pretty sturdy. I've that glue, if I go to rip the vinyl apart, it'll rip on the vinyl, not where it was glued. Basically, it's pretty solid.
How are actual inflatables industrially made? What are those seams? Are they heat sealed together?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're heat and compression. And I tried doing something like that with the tools I had, and I could not figure that out. So glue it was.
So once these started to become more popular, there is an idea of collectability, the same way as you as a kid and me as a kid, we wanted to collect all of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or, whatever we were collecting. There's a feeling like that of your work also. So do you notice that people there's one that's a gateway drug, and then all of a sudden you have repeat customers that want to get 5 of them?
Yeah, definitely. And to me, that is part of the art of itself, because I'm not going to the store and just buying one toy. I'm going and I'm getting all of them and getting the whole series of something. And that's kind of what I wanted to make other adults do, because other adults are smart with their money and they're not just going to the store and buying toys. But I wanted to kind of subvert that and turn them into toy collectors a little bit. So part of the thing too, I've kept my prices relatively modest for that reason. I want people to be able to buy 6 of them if they want that.
Yeah, let's talk about price. As popularity increases, and you've had some really nice articles about your work, in big publications. I think Nerdist did a spot on you. There's been some big things. There's been some celebrities that have bought your work. So how long after some big press event happens do you think, oh, I should maybe raise my price a little bit because people keep ordering more and more and more.
Well, I think that there was like a 2-year period. I don't think I raised the price on them. Recently, I've raised them a little bit because right now I'm dealing with flippers, people that are buying them to just instantly resell them. And, I'm resistant to caving to that because in my mind, it's ruined going to every concert or sporting event. They just buy up all the tickets and then resell them for 3 times the price. So Neil Young has had to raise prices for a ticket to $400, but uh, so I usually in the past, what I did was like raise my prices with sort of like a life change, like when I became a full-time professor, I was like, oh, I'm hot shit now. Like I'll raise my prices $10, oh, I'm now just living on my own and this is my means of paying all of my bills. Well, there's an extra $20 right there. So that's sort of how I've thought about it in my mind. And then galleries and everything like that too, like you raise them so that when you sell them out of a gallery, you're still getting enough, since there's the 50%.
So I looked on eBay just to see like who
Oh yeah.
was flipping them, and there's probably like 8 or 9 right now. And some of them were upwards of like $2,500, I think. So then I went back to your website and looked, and they're increasing the price, but they're within the range that your casual buyer is not going to know that. Like I think part of the trick of reselling on eBay is not pricing it so high that it seems unbelievable.
Yeah, I think that is I think that's what they're going for. Some of them though, like I saw that there are some astronauts on there and that is part of a limited edition. So I think that's why those are priced a little bit higher, just because they're not readily available to anyone.
Do you ever geek out on just being an artist that is collectible?
Sometimes, yeah.
Because that's pretty cool. Being a kid that grew up with toys, like how cool that is.
Yeah, I'm trying to come to terms with it. Like there is some like anger involved because I'm like, I don't want them to be taking advantage of fans, but then at the same time, it is cool. That is like an extra step in the artistic process that some people get to eventually, and I was lucky enough to.
So you mentioned with the astronaut that it's a limited edition, like there's a certain amount of numbers. How many did you decide in that run was going to be as much as you were going to make, and then you were going to stop making those?
Well, that I did a pre-sale when I first moved here, when I first lived on my own, and it was whatever sold in the 3 weeks was the pre-sale number. So 600.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then I'm getting near the end. It's taken way too long, but almost done with those.
What were the conditions of the pre-sale? Like how long did you say you would need to fulfill it?
Well, I was estimating a year and I am well beyond that now. So, but I've hit a few snags as ceramics is, again, ceramics loves to humble you. So I remember we're coming up on Christmas and I've got like 60 of them done, about to glaze them. I glaze them, I luster them, I put them in the kiln, and I want to say 90% shivered.
Ooh.
Something that had never happened before, just shivered, and I fell into like a deep depression and thought like, oh my God, what am I going to do if I can't get this to work? So I figured out some other options and tweaked the glazing a little bit and then got back on the horse and was making them and shipping them out again. But that, having that happen early, and it was a real bummer. And I mean, I'd probably be finished if all of the ones that shivered were made it.
What was it? Like, did you figure out what was causing the shivering?
I think so. I mean, that's again, I buy my own glazes, but then that's the drawback where you're just kind of, you don't have really any options when something like that happens. I talked to the guy who works at Amico, and he was doing some tests and everything, but I don't know. Just the glaze and the clay, it's not working together. So
Yeah, we should describe for the casual ceramic lover that shivering is when the whole glaze surface essentially separates and falls off. It's basically the most catastrophic defect that you can have
yeah.
in ceramics.
Yeah, and it was annoying. Like if it was happening all over, it's one thing. It would just happen like on the elbow, just chunk of it. And I'm like, well, now the whole thing's ruined. I can't do anything with this.
So when you did the pre-sale, like let's say, how much are they? Do you mind sharing?
They were 160 at the time.
Okay. So in your head, if you're saying 160 times 600 or 700, whatever the final amount was, are you blocking out like, okay, 3 months, I'm going to make this many $1,000 and that's how I'm going to pay my rent or mortgage? Like how much are you thinking about this like a business, and how much are you thinking about this like an artist that's just making this work?
I did the math. I don't budget that much just because things are so fluid. But I basically need, $3,000 a month, give or take, to pay for my mortgage, pay my car, credit card bills and everything. So I try to stay in my savings a couple months ahead, and I'll try to stay above that number, So if I get too low, then the fire really lights underneath me, and I got to get back and get my rear in gear and start making things.
The prudent reserve, like that concept of like 3 months or 6 months of savings, so in case something bad happens, is something that I always knew as an intellectual idea. And then I married my wife, who is like pro budget, and she's like, "We're gonna do it." And so now I don't buy any pottery because she's got me living on a budget.
I have at least been in these last 2 years, when I was talking to a friend and I was like trying to get a savings going, and he's like, why would you just save it when you could like buy an Apple stock and just have that just make money over the next year? So I've been trying to do that. I downloaded an app for like a long-term savings plan that'll everything I buy, it rounds up and then it puts that into a retirement plan. So I've been getting better about that stuff. Not the budgeting wise though.
What app is that? Do you mind sharing that?
Acorns.
Yeah, my wife and I use You Need to Budget, YNAB, and that's really helpful budgeting apps if people want to check those out. One aspect of this work is that people have knocked off your work. Not only are they reselling it, but makers in China, going back to the full circle thing, Chinese industry has started to make these objects, and you're finding them in American stores, and I guess Canadian stores too. So, can you talk about how you dealt with that in terms of intellectual property once people started copying you?
Well, I'm lucky in that they suck and they look horrible. So I don't know that I've never felt competition that they're even coming close to my product. So that being said, from what I've talked to a lot of artists that have had to deal with this, and I think the candle market and things like that. I talked to someone who I think buys candles for American stores, and they'll find something that's basically like a trademarked piece that China is trying to sell to them, and they'll have to they just have to not buy it, or if they do buy it, then kind of just I don't know what they do with it, but they usually can't sell them. And from everything I heard is I can't stop China from doing this, so you just kind of have to live with it. And the best you can do is email these companies that are selling them and try to get them to stop. Luckily, this whole pandemic has really just ended that. I haven't seen them popping up anywhere. So I've sort of had a year break on that. I did collect some because I thought eventually I'd make a piece out of it or do something with them, and I'm still going to do that. But finishing those astronauts is my priority. So as soon as those get done, but I thought it would be more fun to just have fun with the pieces um, rather than throw a big fit online, and some people are like, sue the pants off of them, and I'm like, that sounds like a lot of money, and I don't know that I can what to even hope for. So I'd like to have some plans with that, and conceptually I was thinking a lot about like, well, what if I just like, can I just sign these pieces and like sell them then? Because they're my intellectual property. Like, where does that lie? What if I use their designs to now make a piece of mine so I can copy their design of a copy of mine and just kind of play with it like that and have some fun with it. So we'll see what happens with that.
This is also just a story of globalism, because when you think about a lot of those toys, well, I guess in the 80s, it might have even been Japan, but I'm trying to think in the 80s who was making the toys, because a lot of those toys are not American made. They're certainly not American made now. So there's something interesting about a Chinese company or some country that has cheaper labor than the U.S. making a toy, selling it or constructing it, shipping it to the U.S. An American kid buys it. 20 years later, they're making artwork about it. And then it goes back the other direction. And then another company in China says, that's a good idea. We're going to remake that. Like, that is the story of global capitalism right there.
I hadn't thought about that connection. Again, I always think of the like, we find a bone, it's stone. We send it to China to make a plastic version of it. I take that plastic version and I make it back into stone. And now it's going back to China again to steal that. There's too many universes colliding.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about the one-off objects that you make. There was a show in the Erie Museum, is that 2019?
Yeah, it opened in 2019 and it was a year.
So with a show like Lost World, can you talk about how you were thinking about both Hellenistic sculpture, so like sort of the history of a style of sculpture, and 80s nostalgia?
Yeah, I think about it. I feel like both of my veins of working are sort of saying the same things. I go about them different ways. The sculptures themselves, there are a few words that I hate when I hear people describe them. One is mashups, and the other is fan art. I do see a difference between what I'm doing and fan art. To me, those sculptures sort of, I think of them as personal narratives. So they're basically stories about me and my life and growing up or hitting. A lot of them were done like right when I was turning 30, and I felt like this weird transition happening in my life as I became a full-time professor, turned 30, and had all of this responsibility all of a sudden. So with that in mind, I assume people don't want to just see a sculpture of me like laying there naked like ET. So I try to use these characters that represent this idea that is something I identified with as a kid. And then I use them as sort of a stand-in for me to tell this little personal narrative. So all of those characters are things I was into when I was a kid, and were part of this certain part of my childhood and my life that to me represents a thought now, basically. Like I did a piece about Rocky, and that to me was, it's a piece about the death of my uncle, but Rocky to me is something I was really into and represents like overcoming adversity and like fighting through the toughest thing you've ever had to do in your life. And that's where that connection with those characters and me sort of comes into play. As far as like the mixing them with Hellenistic sculptures, that to me comes from The Simpsons, basically. I I remember like loving The Simpsons when they debuted in 89, 90, and just being really into them and loving the butt jokes and the fart jokes, and then you can watch them today and there's just so many like smart things you had no idea were there. And it that juxtaposition I think is like the key to their comedy and their success. And I like that too. I like having a serious museum with like Slimer's butt in it, you know.
So one of my favorites of that series is I don't know if you call it a portrait of Weird Al, but it's
Oh yeah.
it's bigger than life size. It's like, like your head to the middle of your torso. And the funny thing about that is it's almost like Slimer, like the Slimer character, where it's not what you expect in a museum. Like, like he was like a parody artist that has managed to continue to make music forever, for like 20 or 30 years. And when it's not in a pandemic, he's still playing concerts and writing music. So there's something interesting about you immortalizing him in this very Greek style of portraiture.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like from 1980 on, is there any artist that just encapsulates our history better than Weird Al? It's just everything, every style of music, everything. So to me, that's sort of what he represents, and I like it being larger than life size because with the implication of these, like I don't know, I don't think they're going to be around in 10,000 years, but I mean, if maybe they dig him up and Weird Al is our god, like, and was there a 20-foot tall sculpture to this curly haired god? So that's sort of kind of the thinking behind that and why I chose Weird Al. But like at the same time too, I think the reason that he persists for so long is the craftsmanship with his music. Like if he is good at these parodies and his band is good and they replicate these songs, and when you see them live, they're super tight and amazing. So I think that's why he's endured, and craftsmanship, like we were talking about earlier, is so important to me, and from my studies and school and everything.
And are those one-offs? Like, are you sculpting those additive style to be able to make them?
Yep. Yeah, that was sort of a comment or a thought that came from the success of the slipcast dinosaurs. They're, I started making those, and I really wanted to come out with like my next big hit. Sometimes I think of things in terms of music, like you come out with one good album, it's like, well, your next one needs to be good or it doesn't even matter. So I wanted to do something different, more challenging, but also satisfy that artistic part of my brain where you like lose yourself in it. Because the problem with slipcasting, not the problem, but the nature of slipcasting, it's so thought out and methodical and process oriented. And sometimes I actually do find it boring. So you're like, I'm sitting there like building the clay up and just thinking about how hungry I am and everything. And I miss that feeling that came with like throwing and making pots where you just like can lose yourself in it. And so I really wanted to do that. And that's where those sculptures came from. And I just needed a break from reproducing everything. I needed a break from making molds and slip casting and making 1,000 of one object.
How did you develop a sense of touch in that way of sculpture? Because one of the things I was interested in is when I saw those pieces, like you have serious sculpture chops, like you could classically render the figure. So how did you develop that sense of touch versus like, say, slip casting or throwing, totally different sense of touch?
Well, I do think a lot came from teaching. I would say. Because I think that a lot of what it takes to draw and sculpt is just learning how to see objects and learning how to just identify what you're seeing and then translate it. So what happened was when I started teaching full time, I was teaching a sculpture class and we would do busts of each other. So basically I would sit down with 20 students and help 20 students every semester, and we would have to identify what was wrong with their bust versus what they were seeing. And I think that really doing that for like 4 years before I started doing these sculptures just helped a lot, and figuring out how to look at someone's nose and actually get it to the piece that they were working on. So I would give a lot of credit with that, because honestly, I had worked with clay a lot sculpting when I was a kid. I did a little in college, but honestly hadn't really sculpted that much prior to those. And it was something I thought I could do, knew I could do, and had been like helping students with busts for years. And I just went for it. I was kind of nervous. The first one I did, the ET, I didn't post it online until it was done. I just wanted to try it. And if it screwed up, if it fell over, we'll see what happens. So, but it seemed to be successful, and I fired it. And so I shared it, and it people seemed to like it. So after that, it would have been the Ninja Turtle. So I tried to do something bigger. And then the Rocky was the first one I was like, I just really want to figure out how to do something life size, big, like figure out how to get it into the kiln. Because that's part of being an artist too, is just problem solving, and that's what I like about mold making too, is you really have to think about it and figure out how to make a mold of something or how to break it down to make a mold of it. I like that part of the slip casting and the sculpture process.
When you have a big show like in the Erie Museum, your work is accessible in a way that a lot of art in contemporary art museums is not, because it references pop culture. What was the response from both kind of the art critic side of things, like the academic thinking about meaning, but then also what was the response from kids or adults that you saw walk into the show?
Well, kids wanted to touch and play with everything. And so that wasn't great. But I, there's been a few times that like I was in the Ninja Turtle piece, I think has had the most legs sort of online in the intellectual community. But there was someone, I can't think of the name offhand, but there was a scholarly paper done on the Hellenistic sculpture that it was based off of, where at the end they included pictures of my work as sort of a contemporary contemporary point of view of it, which that to me is something I never thought would ever happen, that I'm in like this educational document about the history of sculpture. And I was certainly not planning on that. So I would, and do you know Peter Weller?
I don't.
He's the actor in RoboCop. He plays RoboCop, which one of my favorite movies. But he's apparently has a doctorate in like Renaissance art and teaches. And he emailed me once and was considering buying it, but was like, he said it perfectly. He's like, my son loves Ninja Turtles. I love ancient art. And this is a piece for both of us. So I think he wanted to get a smaller one. He didn't necessarily want the big piece, but obviously I don't have smaller ones. So
yeah, that piece, I can see why that had the most legs, critically speaking. It's a beautiful sculpture. Like when I looked at it, I was like, man, he has nailed the feeling of a classical sense of proportion and scale and composition with contemporary subject matter. So it was, just spot on. Almost every piece in that show, when you were posting images, I was like, damn, that's a good idea. I kept saying that over and over again in my head.
Thanks. Yeah, that part is a process to me. Like I have in my mind sort of a library of characters that mean something to me. And then that becomes the process of like, I'll look through books and through photos and everything, and just kind of start to think of ideas and how they will work with the sculpture. I mean, like, I really want to do an Ernest sculpture from, Ernest. But sometimes, like, what'll happen is online, I'll post something online and people are like, oh my God, you should do a Darth Vader one. And to me, that's like missing the point. I'm like, oh, well, I'm not Darth Vader. I don't see myself as being that cool ever. I'm more of an Ernest guy. And like Star Wars is almost too cool now for me to want to have anything. If I was going to do anything, it would be Jar Jar Binks, I think, since he's kind of a really tragic figure in
much maligned
Star Wars mythology. Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked about this or if it was a post you made, but the first version of Jar Jar Binks, he was like an assassin. Like he was like a serious killer.
Oh.
Or maybe my wife is really into Star Wars. So it might've been with her, but she was saying essentially like they did test runs of it and it didn't fly with him being this like evil killer. So then they made him what he is, which, people just like maligned that character over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. The weirdest Jar Jar Binks fact. I don't know if you know this or not, but Michael Jackson wanted to play him.
Whoa.
And was going to play him in like Thriller prosthetics and just be a guy in makeup being goofy. The stories behind that are really weird. I've heard a few podcasts with Ahmad Best. He plays Jar Jar, telling that story, and they're fascinating.
Wow.
Especially what could have been.
Yeah, and imagine him like breaking out some dance moves as Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah. I mean, actually, now that sounds great to me. So.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about Jurassic Park. This has been something in that eerie show. You had like a really large bust of the T-Rex, which was an amazing sculpture. But can you talk about the influence of those movies and watching a movie series that has been produced over enough time that you grew up as the series got produced?
Yeah, I really did grow up. So I was with that series. I was 8 when the first one came out, prime age for that movie, and just lost my mind when I saw it. And then the second one was 97, so 4 years later, 12, and then I guess 16 when the last one came out. So I was going through puberty during this and everything. But they really that Jurassic Park movie really had, as I referenced earlier with like the making of books, like that to me just really set my mind kind of where I am now. And that's what I wanted to do for a while. I didn't even know how to do it. And I'm lucky I didn't get into that, but I really wanted to just do like movie makeup. And I used to, like, when I was in high school, I built like blood packets for like gunshots and stuff and experimented with those. So I really had dreams to do that. And luckily I didn't, because it went to CGI pretty quickly thereafter. So that to me just, I think, really got me going creatively in the background, the first Jurassic Park movie, and just watching them work and watching the documentaries, immensely valuable. But then, yeah, so the second one came out, I was 12 for my birthday, because I was born in May. So the movies would always come out like right during my birthday. I had a party, we all went, and I was still young enough to really be into it, but I could start to notice that my other friends weren't quite as into it as I was. Like 2 months later, I'm like, you guys want to play? And they're like, we're going to go talk to these girls. So, see you. But, and then, by the time the third one came out, I'm in high school on the football team, and I was actively hiding my love for it. So, and then after that, I just never thought I would see another Jurassic Park movie ever again. That changed, obviously, but there was that 15-year period where I was just, it was done. It was this thing I had, and I just had to remember and love it.
I was reading through your stories on Instagram, and I love your feed, because you have like just the variety of stuff you post from your own work to pop culture stuff is good. So in your stories, you gave this like analysis or like your take on the new Jurassic Park, and there was something that was interesting that you said, which is that the newer movies, because of CGI has gotten better, you see everything. Like you see all the dinosaurs, and that makes it less scary because you're actually seeing everything. Versus, I think you compared it to Jaws, where like the scariest thing about Jaws is the music. It's not like the mechanical shark it's only scary because you don't see it that much. If you would see that in Jaws, like 80% of the movie, you'd be like, that doesn't look real. So can you talk about in terms of like movies and horror and fear? Because I know you make your own like little horror clips.
Oh yeah.
What makes a good character scary?
Oof. Well, there's nothing scarier than your own mind and the anticipation of not knowing what's coming. So that's, movies have lost their way with that a little bit. With great power comes great responsibility. And now that they can do anything they want, they've sort of forgotten those principles. But back in the day, I mean, Jaws, that was not necessarily what Steven Spielberg wanted to do. He wanted there to be more shark, but the robot they built wasn't working. So they only got a few shots of it. And then it wasn't until John Williams had a go at it that he created that anticipatory score, and it all came together. And then I think from there, people learned that that's what is really scary about it. But yeah, to me, it's that moment right before it's the buildup, the anticipation right before something happens. So like the T-Rex doesn't come out right away in Jurassic Park. It doesn't come out until an hour into the movie. And there's just a slow build up to it. There is the goat there, and then you come back and the goat's gone, and you see it a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's that money shot of it coming out of the fence right there. And that's, I think, to me, what makes it resonant and awesome.
So you've done some ads for your work that are little horror movies. They're like little, like minute or 2 minute movies, and there'll be something like the other one I was watching was a pterodactyl that is a clay one you've made, and it comes off of a shelf, and then it attacks your wife and cuts her head off.
Yeah.
And there's fake blood. Like, it is so funny. My wife and I were watching it this morning and just laughing. So tell me about like wanting to use almost like a parody or that genre to advertise your own work.
Well, yeah, to me, like I said, that was one of the things I always wanted to do, was go into like that movie magic, special effects type of stuff. And, so there came a point where I had started taking some photos, sort of like social media photos, advertising my dinosaurs as they were alive, or like, oh, look at this guy, he got into my pizza, oh, he's up for sale now too, by the way, and then that was probably in like August, and I remember doing a few of those when it came up to Halloween, and I was like, oh my God, I love doing blood special effects. I just need to do that. And after one Halloween of doing those, that just is what they became. I didn't do the non-Halloween specific ones, but I haven't done them for 2 years because I've just been busy. It takes a lot of time, because it'll take me like 2 days per video. Not that the special effects are that great, but still it takes a little bit of time. But it's also just a way, like, I would say about a year ago, I got really into the Friday the 13th movies, and I was watching behind the scenes stuff about that. And that took me down a whole new rabbit hole of stuff I'd like to do with like casting body parts out of rubber and we'll see. Maybe next year I'll get into some of those when I have a little bit more time and a little bit more blood.
The blood is so satisfying, those bits.
Yeah.
It's great.
And the best part is like, I'm trying to walk the line between it being realistic and just looking like crap, so I do have the benefit of like it has to be okay, but I don't have to get that involved into it. To me, the one that was maybe the most satisfying was I did sort of an Indiana Jones type one. And that was a lot of like tests of casting a dinosaur out of wax and like putting a skeleton inside of it as I cast it in wax, so I could do like a time lapse melting of it. And that took a lot of time and a lot of experimentation for such a short video, but it was fun.
So if people want to see both these videos and to buy your work, what's the best way to do that?
Well, so Instagram is the thing. That's where everything is collected and saved. So those videos are all in there. You probably have to scroll since it's not October right now, but usually I share them during October or leading up to the new videos if I do them that year. And then as far as buying my work, I've had to, I go in and out of phases, because like I said, there are those flippers, and while I can't stop them, there are little things I can do to kind of make it harder for them to get the work. So right now I've been sort of doing spur of the moment drops where I'll kind of give people a heads up a little bit in advance. And then there's a link in my Instagram stories, and that's the only way to get to the website. So you would have to be like, I'll give you a heads up. You'd have to be paying attention and click on the story, click on the link, and then go get them that way. I do have, as far as some of the bigger dinosaurs go, I do made to order versions of those. So like some of the biggest ones I do are $1,200, and you can go online and order those anytime, and I'll make those over. It's like a 4 to 6 week make time on those.
There's a sweet picture of Jennifer Gardner. I can't remember. Garner. Yeah. Holding one of the really big ones. So that's a good ad.
Yeah. I had no idea. She is from Charleston, West Virginia. And it was very early on. This was just complete luck. But a bookstore / art gallery in Charleston reached out to me. They're called Taylor Books, and they just wanted me to put some pieces in there for their arts walk. And apparently she goes in there all the time when she's home, and I did not know. And she apparently bought one from them, and then she emailed me, and it said, the email headline said like Jennifer Affleck, and then it was signed Jennifer Garner. And I was like, pardon me, but are you Jennifer Garner? And she was like, oh my God, yes, I thought you knew. And I was like, oh, I okay, thanks. But I still thought that it might be an elaborate prank until I got the picture. I was like, okay, I know I have your Beverly Hills address, but I need that photo.
You've had a few other celebrity purchases, right?
That might be the only big celebrity. I've had a few chats. Frank Stallone emailed me. His email, word for word, was, "Hi, Brett. How much is that statue of my brother? Is there more?" Cheers, Frank.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. And then Peter Weller emailed me, but that never really, I'm also not as good as a businessman as I probably should be. So where I should be pushing, I don't, unfortunately. And I was in a TV show. I had my work in that TV show with Kristen Wiig, Last Man on Earth. And
that was a sweet shot.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was, if you want to hear the story behind that was the only show at the time and over the last decade that I thought was hilarious and was watching in real time as it was coming on. And I just get an email out of the blue one day, like, "Hey, we've been looking for your work. I work for Last Man on Earth to do props and set designs, and we want to show your work in the show." And I was like, "Oh my God, my favorite show. Like, where do I sign up?" And so they wanted a piece, but they needed it in like 3 days. And they're like, "How about you just take a photo, give it to us as high quality, high res as you can get it, and we'll print it and frame it and put it in there. And then he sent me an email. He's like, I do want to warn you though, I think they're going to make fun of it. And I was like, oh my God, that's even better. So, like there is a scene where Kristen Wiig goes into it and like looks at it and goes, scoffs at it and walks away. And that's pretty much it. But it does take up the screen for one shot. And I think that the Easter egg of it was that in that episode, Laura Dern, who was in Jurassic Park, that was her bunker. So I think her having dinosaur art in her bunker was supposed to be a funny aspect of it. So
I think you can retire now, man, because this is like the best thing ever.
Yeah, I was pretty pumped.
You're part of a meta storyline with your favorite movie as a child and your art.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet. I don't know if I'll ever come close to doing something like that ever again. There is a movie that was filmed in Pittsburgh that I'm supposed to be in the background of, but we'll see. It's some Netflix movie with Jason Momoa.
Oh yeah, Aquaman.
Yeah. So I had some set direct designers see my work at the museum that I sell out of here, the Carnegie Museum. I'm just in the gift shop, and they saw it there, and they came out and bought a few pieces to, I think it's Marissa Tomei's office that I'm in. We'll see. Maybe the movie never comes out. I don't know, but.
Well, we didn't actually plug what your Instagram is, so can you leave that so people can get in touch?
Oh yeah, it's Brett Kern Art, BRETTKERN Art, and that's me on pretty much everything. That's my email at Gmail, and that is my Instagram.
Well, thanks, man, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was fun.
I'd like to thank Brett for taking the time to do this interview. It was a pleasure to geek out on toys and pop culture. Before I go, I wanted to give one more plug for the Amico Community Corkboard, which is in support of the Southern Crossings Pottery Festival. That's happening this weekend, March the 5th through the 7th, and you can find access to that sale at sxpf.org. Also, I wanted to thank ClayShare for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. They are an online ceramic education platform that offers hundreds of full-length classes that you can stream straight to your smart TV or compatible device. If you'd like to sign up, use the offer code RAMBLER25 and receive a 25% discount on your first 3 months of membership. To sign up today, visit clayshare.com. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.